Shalom from Jerusalem. This is Israel Update. Today is the 389th day of the war that Hamas started on October 7th, 2023. This is a multi-front war where Hamas brutally attacked Israel on October 7th, and within 24 hours, Hezbollah from the north had joined in with a different type of fire that has gone on from that day until now. In this multi-front, Israel has had attacks from both the Hamas in the Gaza Strip, from Hezbollah, and from the other Islamic regime Iranian proxies like the Houthis in Yemen, like Hezbollah in Iraq. Just today, another Houthi UAV hit inside the Ashkelon area, and here we are 389 days into this. We're going to talk today about the different issues that are on the table. And to do that today, we are going to be joined by three specialists that I'm very pleased to be able to introduce. We have Brigadier General Doron Gavish. He is a retired Brigadier General, but he actually right now is the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force, doing that in reserve duty. And he is the former commander of the Israel Air Defense Missile Defense. Welcome, Doron. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you. I want to welcome Mr. Mark Kimmett, retired Brigadier General, former Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And I'd love to also introduce Zeynep Ribua, who is a research fellow at the Huntston Institute. Zeynep, thank you so much for joining us today as well.
Thank you.
Doron, I'm going to start right now and ask you straight out. We, as I said, are 389 days into this war. Today we saw a UAV hit in the area of Ashkelon. We saw a different UAV hit in the area of Nahariya. I say sadly we have had casualties in Israel today from rockets and missiles. Can you take us a bit through in that sense what is happening right now on the different fronts with the different attacks, both from Hamas and from Yemen and from Hezbollah in Lebanon?
Well, thank you, Miri. I think this is a super important point, and reminding what we've seen today coming from Yemen. It is once again highlighting the fact that this is a multi-directional war. It was like this before, and still is, unfortunately. There are those challenges that we saw in the past. We are in a complete different situation, of course, in the last few weeks, but still the challenge of UAVs is there, the challenge of multi-directional is still there, and the goals of the war are still in front of us. Having said all of that, in the last few weeks and the last 24 hours, we still see Israel in the initiative. We see it, of course, in the northern arena with the Hezbollah. Where we see that in the last 24 hours and probably in the last few weeks, days and weeks, the anti-tank threat is almost not there anymore. Once Israel infantry soldiers are in the northern part of Israel into the Lebanon border, this is super important. And this would be, of course, what we are expecting also from the future. We see that Hezbollah is still trying to organize himself. The new leader they just announced, and we see that they are still launching rockets toward Israel. The numbers are much lower. The organization is much weaker, but the challenge is still there, and we still have a way to go. With Iran, of course, few days after the Israeli strike, the question is still in the air, what would the Iranians do? Of course, from the Israeli side, mainly from the air and missile defense side, we are ready. On this, I would have to say that it is not only us, this is the full coalition led by the United States, CENTCOM forces in the air, in the ground. We know that some other means were deployed here to Israel. So there is a fully alert if something like this will happen. I think that the dilemma now is in the Iranians' side. I think that no one in Israel suggests them to attack Israel. They know exactly what could happen, but days would tell. And in the Gaza Strip, the situation there is is still complicated from the term that the hostages are still in the hand of the Hamas. We know that there is a renewal of the discussions between Israel, the Egyptian, Qataris, and we hope that it would lead for some agreement, and we sure hope that we would see back our hostages in Israel.
So I'm going to take what Doron you were just talking about right now, 101 hostages, different initiatives that are on the table. And Mark, it kind of feels that right now everybody is into initiatives. In what way do I mean? We've heard pretty much over the last 48 hours an Egyptian initiative that said 4 hostages for 48 hours, stop of fighting. We heard of a different, perhaps, I'm not sure if it's reliable, U.S. initiative that said 8 hostages for 28 days of stopping. I've heard of an Israeli initiative that said 10 hostages for a week of stopping. And together with all of that, we have the ongoing kind of shuttle diplomacy that has been done by Amos Hochstein on behalf of the Secretary of State, trying to arrive at some kind of an agreement when we talk about what's happening inside Lebanon. So it's like we have all of these initiatives going on. I look at it right now and I say, do you think that there can be any kind of initiative that the United States right now will actually really go forward with a week before the election? I ask it from Israel sitting in Jerusalem. I wonder how you view that sitting in D.C., inside the United States, what it looks like from there.
Well, I actually think, Mara, that there would be nothing to delight the Biden administration more in its waning days before the election than to get some sort of agreement. So I actually think that Bill Burns, Amish Hochstein, probably Brett McGurk are out there pounding the pavement, doing the shuttle diplomacy to try to get something before next Tuesday.
So if you're looking at it in that sense right now, and if I want to look at it without either one of us knowing what's going to happen next Tuesday, obviously none of us understand that, could you try to illuminate for us at the moment a little bit what you think would be the differences, without giving them a grade, of a difference in the foreign policy that would be in a future administration, if it would be a Harris administration or a Trump administration, just to try to give us here in the Middle East a sense of what you think the differences would be, whichever administration happens to come to be next week?
Yeah, let's start with the Harris administration. Kamala Harris, when it comes to foreign policy, is somewhat of a cipher. I don't think that she's really had an opportunity to express her foreign policy vision, or if in fact she even has a foreign policy vision. Her foreign policy advisor, Phil Gordon, I think his views are well known. I think he would be more of the same as the Biden administration, which is to try to draw the fine line between Palestinian concerns and Israeli concerns. And then on the larger issue of Iran, we'll desperately try to get back into the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. So whether it's the Iranian nuclear deal, whether it's the general issues with regards to Israel and Palestine, I think you're going to see a continuation of the Biden administration. Now, if we see some new people in there, I think her advisors will have a significant amount of influence with her, simply because she doesn't really have a foreign policy record that she can stand on or has expressed. Now, it's quite a bit different with ex-President Trump. If he comes back into office, I think we will see 2 things about foreign policy. On the global issue of foreign policy, he is by nature an isolationist. He proudly tells everybody that he ends wars, he doesn't start wars. That's why you saw him cut the agreement for Afghanistan, wanted to get out of Syria for the most part, was convinced that there was oil to be had in Syria, which kept him in there. But his natural inclination is to be an isolationist. I think he'll be a little more of an internationalist in Europe this time, for the simple reason that he is the one that thinks that he has saved NATO from itself by increasing the dollar contributions by the different countries. But when it comes to Ukraine, I think he's going to do everything he can to try to cut a deal and express his tendency for isolationism and say, look, this is stupid. We don't want to pay for it. We can use that money elsewhere. Where he is different has to do with your region, the area, Israel and the surrounding countries. He has demonstrated that he's a strong advocate of Israel, that he's willing to pay the price both in terms of foreign policy commitments as well as U.S. tax dollars to ensure that the process of normalization, what he called the Abraham Accords, and a term discarded by the Biden administration, is moving forward. I think you'll see his son-in-law back on the trail to continue to try to help that normalization process. So when it comes to foreign policy, Donald Trump is not a cipher. He's pretty well understood that he's an isolationist, for better or worse, except when it comes to the key area that we're talking to, which is Israel and the greater Middle East.
So that fascinating description that you just gave right now, to me now, as I look at you, Zainab, and I'm thinking to myself, what does this mean inside our arena? So I'm going to continue and talk about what in Israel we call the Abraham Accords. We never called it anything else in that sense. And the different countries that signed those treaties over 4 years ago, and the continuation of where we've gone in that sense. And I look at both sides of what Mark was just talking about, and even what Doron was talking about before. So Iran, in the aftermath of the attack of Israel last Friday night against the different Islamic regime sites inside Iran, Iran came out with very different types of rhetoric. It came out with a downplaying, and then it came out with a very strong voice. It was in its own way, it was almost contradictory. And I'm wondering in that sense how in our arena, both the countries that are signed on the agreements with Israel that were done at the time of former President Trump, but have continued throughout this time period. And I would say, Mark, in the one sense that I do think that in this war we have seen strong backing from the administration on a lot of different aspects that have to do with this war. And I do want to call that out. Doron himself in that sense, he's the head of a task force which is working with our allies, and that's an amazing thing that has been part of that war. But if I look at the Abraham Accord countries, Zainab, and I wonder to myself, how are they looking right now at the Iranian rhetoric? Are they scared by it, or do they see it as something which isn't real? Do they think that Iran is just saying things, that they're going to respond or not? I'm kind of interested for all of us to understand better, will they respond or not, but how is that viewed from the countries in and around our area?
Thank you. I just would like to give a little background to this. The Biden administration saw the Abraham Accords as an agreement between and a normalization between countries that was good in that sense. However, they dismantled what allowed the Abraham Accords to flourish and to happen, which was a maximum pressure campaign on Iran, putting Iran, making Iran aware that the pursuit of nuclear weapons is not a possibility. The killing of Qasem Soleimani also contributed to that. So there were a set of, also the sanctions, etc. So there were a set of policies that made Iran as weak as possible, so that Arab countries, Sunni countries, who also see Iran as a threat, feel comfortable normalizing with Israel. The moment the Biden administration dismantled these pillars, I would say, is the moment where Israel could not normalize with Sudan. Israel could not continue talks with Mauritania. Israel, instead of having Saudi Arabia normalize with it, had Saudi Arabia normalize with Iran in Beijing. And so it's clear that the Iran policy of the Biden administration did not push towards more normalization. Quite the contrary, it feeded Iran with the necessary rhetoric and political tools so that it can say to the Muslim world, which is trying to attract, that normalization only means more jihad and more resistance, etc. And this is why they have they have seized the opportunity. It was an amazing thing what they have done on October 7th. The moment it happened is the moment when they promoted Hamas as this resistance movement, and that all of the proxies should see it as a model. And of course, now that Israel is winning, that is winning against Hamas, that is winning against Hezbollah, that it killed Nasrallah, that it targeted Haniyeh inside Tehran. These are very important military gains, but also political gains, because it gives back to the Arab countries who wanted to normalize with Israel the confidence that Israel is a regional power, that it goes against its adversaries, and that as much as Iran is threatening, it is actually weak, and that this is a message I think that Washington should understand better.
That was an excellent overview for me to understand, in that sense, the different aspects of how you view something from one place and from another. And you highlighted towards the end that aspect of the Israeli capabilities, and especially what Doron mentioned at the beginning, Israel being on the initiative. And I come back for a moment here to Doron and I go, Israel on the initiative. And you both, as an air defense commander, as somebody who has been responsible for our air defense, we all feel safer because of it. And we understand it isn't perfect. It's not hermetic, but it is amazing upon itself. In the last 48 hours, I sit here and I smile for a moment and I go, they've been talking about laser capability. And I want to add on in right now, and perhaps for you to help us understand a little bit better what has been published in the last 48 hours in Israel of both a contract being signed, laser capability being tested out. What does this add into Israel's capabilities? Is this a defense one, or is this also something which is offensive, has offense capability? I'd love to understand a bit more, for our audience to understand a bit more, what are these different publications that are coming out about this?
When we're talking about the laser, this is for sure the future weapon that would be there for offensive and defensive capability. When it comes to the defensive capabilities here in Israel, the idea is that those weapons, the laser ones, would be enhancing our Iron Dome capabilities. They basically would be another tool in the basket of tools that we have in order to deal with the threats such as UAVs, rockets, and cruise missiles, and this is what this system would be capable to deal with. It would still take some time, but it is going there. What Israel is trying to do is really to enhance its defense against UAVs, because we are seeing, although there are great successes, it is not 100%. It is not hermetic. We could say that we remember from the past that we intercepted 170 UAVs that came from Iran. We intercepted almost 300 UAVs that came from Yemen, but still there was one in Tel Aviv, one in Eilat, and now one in Ashkelon. So it is not 100%, and the UAV, the laser weapons, would be a part of enhancing the defense also against those threats.
So I'm just going to ask in that sense, not just in the defense, but as a follow-up just for ourselves to understand, with that new laser technology, is that also something that could impact offensive capabilities?
Some of the offensive capability are already using laser mainly to point at a target, not as the weapon itself. This would also would take some time. The military historians probably remember the ABL project in the United States, which was on the offensive, but it also unfortunately was stopped because there were some challenges in the development. So offensive weapons, yes, but this also probably would take time. It could enhance again the offensive abilities by pointing targets and things which with this nature. But as a weapon itself, this would take time, probably more than the defense part of it.
So as we look in that sense, future weapons, present weapons, Mark, I'm going to use all of the different backgrounds from, your over 40 years of service in different places. You've both been in CENTCOM, you've been in the ministry, in the Secretary of Defense office, in the Secretary of State office. You've really been in a lot of different places. And when we talk right now about the possibility that Iran will retaliate against Israel for last Friday night's attack, what kind of threat does that mean for U.S. forces in and around? Meaning inside Israel, we're sitting here and going, yes, no, will they, won't they? And what we don't talk about here is there a direct threat to U.S. forces? Is this something that could come back against the different deployments of the United States throughout the different Middle Eastern arenas?
Well, certainly, and we've seen that throughout, and not just after October 7th, but well before October 7th. We have U.S. military bases in the region. Most of them are local national bases with American troops on them. But you've seen the number of times that al-Assad in Iraq has been attacked by the Iranians and by the Hashid. But if the Iranians really wanted to have a regional war and they wanted to expand the width and breadth of this war, they wouldn't simply attack Israel or al-Assad. They would attack some of our other air bases that we have. Al Udeid, the largest base that we have outside of the United States, sitting in Qatar right now. Inside of Kuwait, we have at least a full mechanized infantry brigade worth of troops. And you have a significant number of other smaller bases with hundreds, in some cases, thousands of American troops, not to mention the deployments that we have up in Kurdistan. So there are a lot of American troops based in the Middle East throughout the region, throughout the countries. And if Iran really wanted to expand this, or as has been threatened, not only retaliate against Israel for the attack, but for the Americans who they say supported that attack, there are a lot of opportunities, there are a lot of targets, and there are a lot of troops on the ground.
And those troops on the ground that we're talking about are the United States troops. But there's another type of troops on the ground or international force on the ground, two different types of it. In Lebanon, we have UNIFIL, the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon. And of course, more known perhaps around the world is Unra, the United Nations Relief and Welfare Agency for the Palestinian refugees, established by the United Nations in 1949. And in the last 24 hours, the Israeli Knesset, the Israeli legislator, passed a law which it doesn't disband Unra. Unra, the United Nations agency, is a United Nations agency. What it decided to do inside Israel is to stop Israel cooperating with this agency. And I put it there right now because, Zainab, I'm wondering in that sense, how do the different Arab countries around us, both locals and governments, view the different United Nation capabilities? Those are two vastly different ones. UNIFIL, on the one hand, is a peacekeeping force. It's soldiers who were there and have not done their mandate in the last many, many years, meaning they didn't stop the Hezbollah buildup. But UNRWA, in that sense, is a capability, not just for relief and welfare, but it was basically most of the schools, education throughout the Gaza Strip over the last 70-some years. How is that viewed in that sense, that idea that Israel says we're going to stop it? Or more correctly, perhaps I'll phrase myself in a better way, how do the different people around here view UN forces? Do they see them as something that helps them? Do they see them as something that can be used? Do they see them as something that hinders their capability? Give us a sense of what that looks like.
I would say that for this particular case, it's a real controversy because it's the first time that you have a UN agency that in a time of war has its mission and also its a structure, etc., and its credibility being questioned. And I think that the UN is very aware of how dangerous it is, and so on. But but it's clear that the UN agency has issues and has issues of having been subverted by terrorist groups that took advantage of it. I mean, the fact that Sinwar was found to have a passport with clearly his title saying that he works for a UN agency, that's something that this is a red flag, and Israel has the total. I mean, Israel did the right thing by pushing this legislation and questioning the UN agencies' missions and even structure because of how they have been infiltrated by terrorist groups that took advantage of it. And I think that this is just the start. The UN agency as you said, as you mentioned, they do have several programs from education to aid, etc. Their role is very important, but it seems that Israel will empower other agencies and other associations and groups who can do as much work as the UN agency on that end. And it seems that of course, it's going to be a long controversy, but investigations will show that there is a real problem that needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. As I listen to that right now, and I'm thinking of all of the different challenges we've talked about, I'd love it if each one of you now would give us a look forward, and each one in around 30 seconds, what you see now as the very near future challenges that Israel faces in the days ahead. Doron, I'll start with you.
Well, Mary, I think that, when you look at the essence of the defense, the first thing is to deny the enemies from its goals. The other one is to save life. This is basically what the air defense was doing in the last year, and this is what it should be doing also in the future. But the third part, and this is, I think, what is more important, is to enable the conditions to the policy to go forward after the military offensive and defensive got us to a point that we are now strong enough. We are in the initiative, and hopefully this is what I hope for the near future, that we would really enable the condition for our policymakers to go forward to the future.
Absolutely. Amen to that in that sense. Mark, please.
Yeah, I think for the American perspective on this, along with continuing to support the legitimate defense of Israel, the key issue is, will our negotiators break through or assist into a breakthrough for the ceasefire and the return of Israeli hostages? Some of those Israeli hostages are also dual American Israeli citizens. We'd like to see our hostages back, and it is certainly the case that Israel would like to see them back. So the greatest challenge from our point of view, other than the obvious, to make sure that Iran does not have a chance to expand this war, is to see a legitimate, verifiable, and fair ceasefire, which leads to the return of hostages.
Thank you so much. And thank the three of you and our three panelists. This is all of the time that we have. I want to thank all of our viewers. Shalom from Jerusalem.